Hi, my name is Madison Carter. I'm 24 years old and I just graduated in marine biology at Stanford University. It should have been a day filled only with joy. A day when I could finally hold my head high after 4 years of relentless study, proud that I had at last proven my worth. My parents had spared no expense, renting out the luxurious terrace of the Fairmont San Francisco, where the Golden Gate Bridge glowed beneath the twilight sky. A string quartet played classical pieces, and trays of delicate food were passed endlessly among the guests. Everything was flawless, so lavish it felt unreal, especially when only weeks earlier they had called me worthless, the child who would never bring honor to the family. But then, in the middle of all that laughter and congratulations, I heard something that shattered my heart. When the waiter set a crystal champagne flute in front of me, I caught my mother Elena Carter leaning toward my father, her lips barely moving as she whispered words I'll never forget. We wish you were never born. Tonight, we finally correct that mistake. Her diamond bracelet caught the light as she gestured subtly toward my glass. It happened in an instant, the kind of moment anyone else might have missed, but I didn't. In a flash, my blood turned cold. They had planned this. My own mother, in front of everyone, was trying to destroy me with the same mouth society praised as that of San Francisco's charitable queen. I couldn't tremble. I couldn't let it show. I picked up the glass, smiling at all the faces, waiting for the perfect toast moment. Then, while every eye was still on me, I turned gracefully and handed the glass to Isabella, my sister, the shining jewel my parents always adored. You deserve this more, I said lightly, almost teasing, and Isabella beamed, lifting the glass and drinking without a second thought. That night, beneath the glittering lights of San Francisco, I realized the terrible truth. My own blood family were the very people trying to erase me from existence. Before I continue, I want to pause and ask you something. Tell me in the comments where you're watching this from. And let me ask you, too, have you ever had to stand up for your own worth, even when the person hurting you is your own family? I was born and raised in a family that the outside world loved to call San Francisco's perfect model. My father, Thomas Carter, was known as one of the most successful biotechnology businessmen in California. The CEO of Carter Biosystems, a corporation the press never stopped praising as the pride of America's biotech industry. He appeared on the cover of Fortune, spoke at lavish conferences, and was invited to lecture on business strategy at prestigious universities. But behind all that admiration was a man who was cold, calculating, and who never placed family above profit. To him, Isabella and I weren't daughters of his own flesh and blood. We were investments, proof that he had built the perfect family empire. My mother, Elena, was no different. She came from a prominent family, a lineage with generations in finance. From a young age, she was taught that reputation, status, and elegance mattered more than anything else. She was the kind of woman whose magazine photos were always retouched to flawless perfection. The kind who demanded every public appearance leave people in awe. In her eyes, Isabella was the perfect continuation of the Carter bloodline. Brilliant, graceful, a Princeton Business School graduate with outstanding honors and swiftly rising into an executive role at the company. At every party, every photo shoot, my mother introduced Isabella as the rightful heir of the family. And me? I was just Madison, the second daughter, never good enough in my parents' eyes. I still remember the first time I realized the difference, when I was in elementary school. I had competed in a science Olympiad and to my own surprise won a bronze medal. I rushed home thrilled, hoping my parents would be proud. But the moment I stepped into the living room, I saw them popping champagne, celebrating because Isabella had been chosen to represent our school at a national debate competition. My father gave my medal a quick glance, then nodded and said, "Good, but don't fool yourself into thinking lab work will ever help your career." My mother didn't even lift her head from the jewelry she was examining. From that day, I understood recognition in this family would never be for me. By high school, the favoritism became undeniable. Isabella was the star of everything. She was student body president, a swimming champion, a straight-A student, and every time she achieved something, the whole family threw parties, posed for pictures, and saw her name in the local paper. The walls of our home were covered with Isabella's triumphs, from photos of her holding a swimming trophy to the framed acceptance letter from Princeton. And me? I got straight A's, too. I won science awards, too, but mine were tucked away in a drawer. I'll never forget the one time my mother actually attended one of my science fairs, junior year, when I won first place in the entire state for my research on the impact of microplastics on marine ecosystems. I waited nervously, desperate for her hug, her praise. But when they handed me the award and snapped pictures, she leaned down and whispered in my ear, "You look so disheveled. Like some homeless child that doesn't belong here." Her words cut straight through me, killing the joy that had just begun to bloom. My parents never once asked me what I wanted. They had already mapped it out. Madison would study biochemistry, join the company, work as a researcher to support her sister's leadership. Every other dream I had was nonsense. I told them again and again that I loved the ocean, that I wanted to study the effects of industrial pollution on marine life. My father dismissed it with a wave. "That's just for people who write useless reports. You need to do real work to contribute to the family." When I got into Stanford for marine biology, he exploded with rage, threatening to cut off all tuition support. It was only thanks to scholarship aid and later student loans that I managed to hold my ground. I often thought I was born just to be Isabella's backdrop. She always stepped onto the stage bathed in bright lights while I stood in the shadows, waiting for a glance of recognition that never came. I was called stubborn, ungrateful, while Isabella only had to smile to receive everything. That feeling etched itself so deeply into me that from a young age, I believed I was nothing more than a shadow, an unnecessary piece in the Carter family. And the older I grew, the more I understood a bitter truth. In that house, love was never unconditional. It was tied to achievement, to whether or not you matched their expectations. Isabella matched them and she was loved. I was different, and I became the thorn they wanted to cut out. My grandmother Dorothy was the rare light in the otherwise dim-shadowed years of my childhood. While my parents dismissed and ignored my efforts, she was the only one who truly saw me. She wasn't just my source of comfort. She was an extraordinary woman. Decades before I was even born, she had been one of the most brilliant marine biologists in California. She had won major research awards, her work paving the way for understanding ocean acidification and its impact on marine ecosystems. Ironically, it was her early discoveries that laid the foundation for what would later become Carter Biosystems Environmental Division. Yet, in every company history book, every glossy brochure, her name was nowhere to be found. I remember once she took me down to the old study of her house and opened a dusty filing cabinet. Inside were stacks of research notes written in her elegant yet strong handwriting. She told me those formulas had led to the very first biodegradable compound that my father's company used to launch itself. "They took my work," she said with a sad smile, "and then erased my name from every certificate, every photograph, because I was a woman, Madison." Back then, people didn't believe women could stand equal to men in the lab. Hearing that, my young heart was both furious and aching. I asked her, "Do you regret it?" She looked at me, her eyes lit with a fierce spark. "Never, because science isn't about glory, it's about serving the planet. But I do regret letting others decide my worth." Grandma Dorothy was nothing like my parents. If my father saw everything only through the lens of profit and power, she looked at ecosystems, at future generations. She always told me, never let anyone tell you that your passion is meaningless. If you love the ocean, follow it. If you want to fight, then fight. Don't become anyone's shadow, not even the shadow of this family. Those words became my compass. The thing that held me steady every time my father scolded me or my mother tore me down. What my parents didn't know until one day was that my grandmother had prepared a secret gift for me. When I was little, she often told me that one day I would be free, that I would have the strength to never depend on anyone. I thought it was just her way of comforting me. But in truth, she had quietly established a trust fund worth $15 million in my name alone. The conditions were clear. The money would only be released once I graduated from college or turned 26, whichever came later. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was the key to my escape from my parents' grip. I learned about it when I was 17, shortly before she passed away. She called me into her room, held my hand tightly, her eyes clouded by illness, yet still glowing with pride. "Madison," she said, "I won't let you spend your life trapped in this cycle of injustice. Promise me, no matter what happens, you'll follow the path you choose. Don't let anyone buy you off or force you." At the time, I didn't fully understand, but I nodded. A few months later, she was gone, leaving me with a hollow ache that never left. My parents knew nothing about the trust until 4 months before graduation. During a company meeting about family finances and assets, the firm's longtime attorney, perhaps by accident, mentioned a special account managed by an independent group of trustees. He assumed my parents already knew and made a passing remark. But in that instant, I saw my father's face drain of color and my mother's eyes harden into a cold glare. After the meeting, they said nothing to me, but I knew the storm had begun. From that moment on, the way my parents looked at me was completely different. It was no longer mere contempt or dismissal. It was quiet hostility. They understood that if I received that inheritance, I would be completely independent. I wouldn't need the company. I wouldn't need the prestigious Carter family. And I might even have the power to stand against them. They were afraid because I was no longer just the defiant child. I had become a real threat. And I began to realize that the trust fund wasn't just an inheritance my grandmother left for me. It was proof that she believed I was capable of so much more, that she placed her faith in my integrity. While the entire Carter family's world revolved around power and money, Dorothy entrusted me with something else, the responsibility to break the toxic cycle. And it was this secret, combined with what I uncovered about the company's ocean dumping, that made me a target. My parents didn't just want to seize back the $15 million. They wanted to protect the empire my grandmother had unintentionally built with her brilliance, but that they had stolen in name. And in their eyes, the only way to keep everything safe was to remove me from the game entirely. I discovered the company's illegal ocean dumping during my final semester at Stanford when I had the chance to join a field research project run by the Marine Biology Department in partnership with a local conservation agency. The study site was Monterey Bay, a protected marine sanctuary cutting through California's central coast, long documented as being at risk of contamination. I chose the project not just out of scientific passion, but because I had an unshakable, almost instinctive sense that something there was waiting to be uncovered. At first, the work was routine, collecting water and sediment samples, bringing them back to the lab for analysis. Alongside other students, I measured pH levels, dissolved oxygen, and checked for heavy metals. But right from the earliest tests, I noticed alarming irregularities. Cadmium and arsenic levels were far higher than the EPA's safety standards. The deeper we dug, the more disturbing the results became. We began detecting traces of synthetic biocompounds, engineered molecules I instantly recognized from reading industry journals. Typically, these substances only show up in untreated wastewater from biotechnology manufacturing plants. When I reported my findings to my supervising professor, he nodded thoughtfully. "We've suspected this for a long time, but no one has ever had enough scientific data to prove it conclusively." In that moment, a thought echoed in my mind, one I didn't dare speak aloud. Could it be that my own father's company, Carter Biosystems, was the culprit? In the weeks that followed, I quietly devoted more time to comparing water samples from different sections of the bay. The current led me closer to an industrial complex on the northern coast, marked with a sign that read, Coastal Facility, Carter Biosystems. My heart pounded as I read those words. Everything I was uncovering seemed to point straight back at my own family. I started digging deeper. I searched through the facility's public reports on wastewater treatment, but the documents were filled with numbers that looked perfect, so flawless, they were unbelievable. From my internship experience, I knew no process ever ran that smoothly. Something was being hidden. I secretly took photos, stored sample data, and recorded everything carefully in a private notebook. Day by day, the evidence mounted. In samples collected just outside the plant's gates, I detected dangerously high concentrations of biotoxin K9, a new compound not yet included in standard testing lists, but one I recognized immediately. It was the same experimental compound I had read about in the company's internal research documents. There was no way it appeared there by accident. It could only have come from Carter Biosystems laboratories. I felt my stomach twist into knots. On one hand, I was a scientist driven by truth. On the other, this was my family, my parents' company, the place where Isabella now held an executive position. If I went public, it would be like turning a gun on my own bloodline. But then I remembered my grandmother's words. Never let anyone decide your worth. If she were still alive, I knew she would want me to do what was right. That night, I sat alone in my dorm room, staring at the stack of data. I knew with absolute clarity, if I stayed silent, thousands of marine species living in Monterey Bay would continue to suffer the consequences. Polluted water doesn't just cause mutations, it destroys entire ecosystems, wipes out fish populations, and poisons generations yet to come. I couldn't close my eyes to it. I decided to confront my parents. During one of the rare evenings when we sat down to dinner together, I gathered all my courage and spread the printed test results across the table. I know what the company is doing at the coastal facility, I said, my voice trembling but firm. I have data. I have evidence. If you don't stop the illegal dumping, I will report it. The entire table fell into a deathly silence. My father slowly lifted his gaze from his glass of wine, his eyes sharp as blades. My mother pressed her lips tightly together, her hands clenched in her lap. Only Isabella looked shaken, her wide eyes filled with shock. Finally, Thomas Carter spoke, his voice low and cold. You don't understand what you're saying, Madison. There are things bigger than you realize. This family survives because of silence. For the first time, I didn't bow my head. Silence isn't family, I shot back. Silence is complicity. From that moment, I knew I had stepped onto a path with no return. I began collecting everything, duplicate data sets, photographs of the samples, meticulous logs of time and location. I stored them all on an encrypted hard drive, just in case the worst happened. I knew my parents wouldn't let this slide. And I also knew that this decision, combined with the inheritance my grandmother left me, had made me the one thorn in the Carter family they could never pull out. A dark premonition throbbed in my mind, and just a few weeks later, that premonition became reality. After that confrontation, the atmosphere in my family shifted in a strange way. Before, every phone call and every weekend meeting had been filled with scolding about how my chosen field brought no value to the family or how I refused to intern at the company. But only days after I dared to lay environmental data on the dinner table and declare I would report them, their tone changed completely. My mother started calling more often, no longer questioning my grades or pressing me about career plans. Instead, she asked what kind of flowers I wanted on the tables at my graduation dinner or which dishes I liked so the chef could prepare them. My father even sent me a short text, "Congratulations in advance. You've accomplished something meaningful." Reading those words sent a chill racing down my spine. My father had never once praised me in my life. This change didn't bring me comfort. It only made me more suspicious. They said they would throw a grand party on the terrace of the Fairmont San Francisco, where every glass panel opened to a sweeping view of the bay. "You deserve a celebration worthy of you," my mother said sweetly over the phone, her tone so sugary it felt fake. I forced a polite smile she couldn't see and replied, "Yes, thank you, Mom." But deep down, I knew nothing my parents did ever came without strings attached. In those final days before graduation, I buried myself in finishing my group's research files while also carefully preparing a plan to protect myself. I kept one copy of the environmental data at the university, another on my personal hard drive, and a third with my supervising professor, just in case I happened to disappear. I told no one, not even Olivia and Ethan, my closest friends. I didn't want them dragged into danger. One evening when I went home for dinner a few nights before graduation, I accidentally overheard a heated argument behind the door of my father's study. I was about to walk past when I froze at my mother's voice, full of worry. "Thomas, are you sure this is necessary? What if someone finds out?" My father's tone was low and sharp. "Don't you get it? She already has enough evidence. Add the inheritance on top of that and she'll never depend on us again. She could bring the whole company down." My mother's voice trembled as she answered, "But she's our daughter." "No," my father cut her off. "She's a mistake. We wish she were never born. And tonight at the party, we finally correct that mistake." I held my breath, my heart pounding violently. Every word landed like a hammer blow to my skull. Then my father's voice dropped lower, but still clear enough for me to hear. "The plan is just to make her sick for a few days, get her hospitalized. And during that time, we'll take care of the paperwork, cover the records. If the worst happens, if she dies before the trust is released, the money reverts back to us. That's the law." I stood frozen behind the door, cold sweat breaking across my skin. My own parents were plotting to poison me, the daughter they brought into this world. And it wasn't just about the $15 million. It was about silencing the truth I held about the coastal facility. In that instant, I wanted to storm in, to scream. But another voice inside whispered, "No. If they know you've heard, they'll find another way, something far worse." I stepped back, forcing myself to return to the living room and pretend I hadn't heard a thing. That evening, Isabella sat beside me, chatting cheerfully about her work at the company. She asked if after graduation I planned to apply to an international marine conservation organization. I looked at her face, radiant, confident, yet so blissfully unaware of our parents' scheme. It struck me then, Isabella hadn't been part of that conversation. She was completely separate from their plotting. To her, I was still the distant older sister, but never the enemy. Watching her laugh, my chest tightened. Part of me resented her for being adored, for receiving unconditional love, but another part of me wanted to protect her, to make sure she never became collateral in our parents' power games. I knew that in just a few days, everything would explode, and I had to be ready. From the outside, the days leading up to graduation looked bright and joyous. But for me, they hung heavy like a black fog. My parents spoke gently, smiled often, but every word, every gesture reeked of falsehood. I carried a constant dread that the party they were planning wasn't meant to honor me, but to end me. And the most horrifying part was I couldn't tell anyone, not even the people I loved, because anyone could get dragged down with me. That was when I understood, the battle for my life had begun, and I, Madison Carter, would have to walk alone all the way to the truth. The night of my graduation party finally arrived. As I stepped out of the glass elevator leading up to the terrace of the Fairmont San Francisco, I was nearly overwhelmed by the extravagance that stretched before me. Silver ribbons of light wrapped around each column. Banquet tables draped in pristine white linen stood adorned with imported roses. And a small chamber orchestra played soft melodies that mingled with the delicate clinking of glasses. To outsiders, the scene was proof of wealth, a dazzling display of love from a powerful family honoring their daughter. But to me, every flickering candle felt like a flame waiting to consume my heart with its deceit. Most of the guests were familiar faces from San Francisco's business world. I recognized my father's partners, sharply dressed executives, high-powered attorneys who had served our family for years, and even a few reporters from local tech magazines. Among the sea of strangers, only a handful of people truly belonged to me, Olivia and Ethan, looking slightly out of place in rented formal wear. They hurried to me, wrapping me in hugs of congratulations, and I forced a smile, silently grateful that at least I wasn't completely alone, that I still had people who genuinely cared. As I spoke with my friends, I could feel my parents' eyes fixed on me, never wavering for even a second. Their presence pressed on me like the weight of two vultures circling prey, watching every movement, every word that left my lips. Whenever I shifted my position, they subtly maneuvered to keep me within their line of sight. Their smiles stayed in place, but the stiffness of their lips and the calculating glint in their eyes told a different story. I had grown used to their coldness over the years, but tonight their gaze carried something more than control. It carried the stench of a plan. I caught a glimpse of my father leaning in to whisper something to Marcus, the company's longtime attorney. Marcus nodded, then glanced at me with the sharp, appraising look of someone assessing an item about to be discarded. A shiver ran through me. All my life, that man had been my father's right hand, drafting contracts, plugging every legal loophole, shielding the company from scrutiny. If he was here tonight, it wasn't just to celebrate my graduation. Isabella appeared at my side, smiling radiantly as always. She lifted her champagne flute and tapped me lightly on the shoulder. "Sis, everyone keeps asking me about your plans after graduation. Why are they so obsessed with that? Mom and Dad keep bringing it up over and over." I looked at Isabella and saw the innocence in her eyes mixed with a faint trace of unease. She still didn't understand the truth behind it all. My chest tightened with a tangled rush of emotions, part anger at how she'd been endlessly favored, part pity for how she didn't see she was just another piece on our parents' chessboard. I forced a smile and said, "They probably just want to make sure I'll do the right thing for the family." Isabella frowned. "But isn't this your moment? Why aren't they asking if you're happy or what you want?" That simple question pierced me like a blade. I turned away, sipping my water to avoid answering. When I looked back, I caught my mother's stare fixed on me, her smile stiff as wax. She stood among a cluster of society women, her glass of wine shimmering in hand, yet her attention never wavered from my every move. She had always been a master performer in public, a woman of grace, as the press loved to call her. But I knew the truth. Behind that polished mask beat a cold heart, willing to sacrifice anyone, even her own daughter, to preserve her glory. I drew in a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Every sense in me was on high alert. I knew I was standing in the predator's arena, and I was the prey. The laughter and chatter around me faded into a distant hum, leaving only the pounding of my heartbeat in my chest. My mind flashed to the notebook filled with water sample data I had hidden away. As long as I was alive, that truth could still come to light. And maybe that was exactly why my parents had decided I had to be eliminated tonight. But I did not tremble. I had already overheard their scheme. I was ready, and I swore to myself I would not let them win so easily. The party had entered its most formal stage. Warm golden lights spread across the terrace, glowing against the round tables draped in pristine white cloth, all arranged in a circle around the stage. The soft sound of live strings drifted from the quartet in the corner, weaving together with the delicate clinking of crystal glasses. I glanced around. The guests were all there, business partners, a few journalists, and of course, the family lawyer. Everyone waited for the moment to raise their glasses in honor of the Carter family's celebrated graduate, or more accurately, in honor of Isabella, not me. I sat there in the emerald green dress Olivia had chosen for me, my heart uneasy. From the moment the evening began, my parents hadn't taken their eyes off me. Every movement I made felt as though it were under a microscope. Whenever I spoke with a guest, my father's eyes flicked toward me, then quickly shifted away as he leaned in to whisper something to the family lawyer, the gray-haired man with silver-rimmed glasses glinting under the lights. And then the moment I had dreaded finally arrived. My father rose to his feet, wearing that gentle smile, the same one that had fooled me into trusting him when I was a child, but that now only sent a chill down my spine. He clapped his hands, signaling the servers to bring out a luxurious velvet box. Inside lay a bottle of champagne displayed as though it were a priceless treasure. "This," he began, his deep voice resonant with pride, "is a bottle reserved only for the most special occasions in our family. Madison graduates today, and her future, well, tonight we toast to new beginnings. Nothing could be more fitting to celebrate this moment than with this rare and precious champagne." The guests burst into applause. They laughed, raised their phones to capture this so-called warm family moment. I smiled too, though inside my chest, something ached sharply. I noticed it immediately. My father didn't let the servers pour as usual. He opened the bottle himself and with deliberate care filled each flute by hand. The glass was set in front of me. I tilted it slightly and my heart clenched tight. In the golden bubbles, I saw it, fine white dust glittering faintly under the lights, particles not yet dissolved. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The words I had overheard the night before came rushing back. "We wish she were never born. Tonight, we finally correct that mistake." My throat went dry, but I kept my smile calm, unshaken. I glanced around. My mother pretended to chat with the women beside her, though her eyes never left me. My father raised his glass, waiting for me to follow. In that tense instant, I leaned ever so slightly and tapped Olivia's hand beneath the table. She looked up and met my eyes filled with both a plea and resolve. My lips barely moved as I whispered, "Record this. Record everything." Olivia gave the faintest nod. Quietly, she slid her phone from her clutch, placed it on her lap, and with one discreet touch, set the camera rolling, angled toward the table. "To Madison," my father declared, his voice booming across the terrace. Guests echoed the cheer, their clapping filling the air. I lifted my glass. Isabella, sitting beside me, smiled brightly, her face glowing with pride, with not a trace of suspicion. She had never glimpsed the dark side of our parents, never imagined they could harm their own child. My father's eyes flashed, urging me to drink. I drew in a steady breath, then turned suddenly to Isabella, my voice soft and affectionate. "My dear sister, today isn't just my day. You've been with me through all 4 years of college, encouraging me whenever I was weary. I want to share this joy with you." I smiled and handed my glass to Isabella. The guests clapped approvingly, believing it was nothing more than a sweet gesture of sisterly affection. "Oh, Madison, you're amazing," Isabella exclaimed, her voice brimming with emotion. She took the glass from me without a shred of doubt. I quickly lifted her glass, the clear, safe one, and brought it to my lips. In that instant, my parents went pale. The color drained completely from their faces. My mother stammered, half reaching out to stop it, but it was too late. In front of dozens of guests and the phones already recording, they couldn't do a thing. Isabella tilted her head back and drank in one long sip. "Delicious," she said with a carefree laugh, utterly unaware of what she had just swallowed. The music swelled again. The guests returned to their conversations, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw my parents standing frozen. They forced smiles, clapped along with the crowd, but their hands trembled. The family lawyer bent low to whisper something, his own face betraying panic. I set my glass down gently on the table and smiled calmly. Beneath the table, I gripped Olivia's hand tightly. The camera was still rolling, capturing the entire exchange, the glass switch, the flicker of terror in my parents' eyes. I lowered my head and whispered just loud enough for Olivia to hear. The evidence is sealed. Now they'll have to play by my rules. The terrace buzzed with life. Strings floated through the night air, blending with the chime of glasses, the bursts of laughter, the glittering lights reflecting off San Francisco's towering skyline. I kept my face serene, though inside my heart pounded so hard it felt as if it might shatter my ribs. I had just done something so daring I could hardly believe it myself. I had passed the poisoned glass poured by my father's hand to Isabella, and now all I could do was wait and see what would unfold. The first 15 minutes passed without incident. Isabella laughed brightly, shaking hands with guests, even boasting that our family was preparing to entrust her with bigger responsibilities at the company. I stood off to the side, quietly listening, quietly watching. Every time my parents' eyes flicked towards Isabella, I could see the tension behind their forced smiles, the tight press of their lips. They were afraid. I knew it. And then, about 15 minutes later, the change began. Isabella, who was always flawlessly composed, suddenly placed a hand over her chest. Her face drained of color. "Are you okay?" a guest asked as she swayed unsteadily. I'm just a little dizzy," Isabella murmured, forcing a fragile smile. But within a minute, cold sweat poured down her skin, streaking her makeup in dark trails down her cheeks. I held my breath. My heart clenched with a pang. No matter how bitter I felt toward her, seeing Isabella suffering like this still struck me with a stab of sorrow. But then the memories came rushing back, the times she had taken credit for my work, the times my parents defended her and cast me aside. And tonight, the fact that our parents had meant this poison for me, had wished I were never born. My heart, it's racing too fast, Isabella gasped before collapsing suddenly onto the floor. Screams erupted across the party. Guests stumbled back in panic. Others shouted frantically for help. "Call 911. Get an ambulance now," someone shouted. I rushed forward, kneeling beside Isabella. Strangely, I was calmer than anyone else. Amid the chaos, I leaned close to Olivia and whispered, "Send the video now. Back it up to the cloud. Don't let it get lost." Olivia nodded rapidly, her hands trembling but firm as she tapped on her phone, securing the evidence. The wail of the ambulance sirens cut through the San Francisco night faster than I expected. Paramedics rushed onto the terrace with a stretcher and emergency equipment. Isabella was laid down, her face ghostly pale, her eyes fluttering half shut. "She's struggling to breathe, cardiac arrhythmia," one medic shouted. "We need to get her to UCSF Medical Center immediately." I stepped forward, keeping close, my gaze steady, my voice clear and firm. "Wait, I have critical information. Tell the doctors this is very likely a toxin related to an experimental biocompound from Carter Biosystems, project code BTK9. The substance is called biotoxin K9. The paramedics froze for a split second. One turned to me, startled by the certainty in my voice. "Are you sure?" I nodded sharply. "I interned in the company's lab. I know the signs. If you don't alert them right away, the doctors will lose precious time." Without hesitation, the medic scribbled notes and relayed the message through his radio. I glanced at my parents. They stood frozen, their faces ashen. My mother stammered, her voice cracking. "Madison, what are you saying? Don't slander your own parents like this." I turned, my voice sharp as steel. "Slander? Everyone here saw it was Father who chose that bottle. And soon the doctors will confirm everything. If there's truly nothing to hide, then what are you so afraid of?" The air went silent. A few guests began glancing at my parents with suspicion. The family lawyer stood stiff beside them, sweat beading on his forehead, his mouth unable to form a word. The ambulance sped away. I started to follow, but Olivia caught my arm, worry etched on her face. Are you sure you want to go? I can go with you. Wait for the next episode of this beautiful story. Drop a comment to help me understand something very important. See you in the next episode of this journey.